Hi, Mystery Knox listeners. I'm Kim.
And I'm Mary.
And for today's case, we're going to tell you about 5 Avenger torpedo bombers that took off from a Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and vanished. They were supposed to be flying a routine training mission that had been flown many times before. No remains of any kind, human or aircraft, were ever recovered. But that's not all that went wrong. Just hours after the 14 members had vanished, a 13-man search crew was dispatched and never seen again. This is the case of Flight 19. Mary.
Kim.
So this story, Mary, what did you think? What did you think about it?
Any sort of gone missing just drives me crazy.
Me too.
Like stuff that could have been prevented and...
Very frustrating.
It is.
Very frustrating case. But a lot of them are.
Yeah. Like the other ones don't get me as much as the not knowing.
Yeah.
Like people
the
like that
disappearances.
stuff. And I absolutely can't stand it. Like...
No, I agree.
When we're searching, when we're looking up the information, I need to stop saying like, but it just drives me up the wall finding out what happened and then what could have, things they know they should have done but they didn't do.
Right.
It's like, why? And then it's just there until we're done with the podcast and then I forget about it. But still, that week and a half drives me up the wall.
I mean, I'm not obsessive about it, obviously.
No, I can't.
So when we're doing a case, but I don't forget about them.
No, I'm just saying this is current, and then once we're done, I just shift it away.
And go to the next one.
Yeah, because if you keep going back to it, it's just going to drive you crazy.
Oh yeah, it'll drive you nuts, for sure.
You're going to be like that guy on Ancient Aliens.
Mary, you spoke the forbidden word on this podcast. Yeah, no, but I agree. It was, when I had first heard about this case a while ago, I always knew whenever we started the podcast that I wanted to do it, do an episode on it.
And I've never even heard of this.
Yeah, I know.
And you're like, Flight 19, and I'm like, okay, what is this about? And I'm just thinking Swan Dive or something. But no, this is a little bit more. And I didn't realize the extent of it, but of course not.
No, I always knew I wanted to do an episode on it because it just interests me so much, and it's just...
How did you find out about this?
I found out about it through another podcast.
Oh.
Like a long time ago. Yeah. A long time ago. I was listening to that podcast and they did an episode on it, I think. And then, I don't know, I was like, oh my God, I'd never heard about it until that day. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I want to know more. So then I did like a little bit of research on it, but I didn't go full, deep dive like we do when we do our episodes. Mm-hmm. And I just had always thought about it. So then when we started doing the podcast, I just knew right away that was one that I wanted to do for sure. Because you know how, like, you always have those cases that just stick to you.
I was just thinking that, like, what is a case that just stays there?
Yeah. So... One of mine, and we've already done an episode on it, was the Dyatlov Pass. Mm-hmm. Which
is one I've never... I didn't even know about that one either.
Yeah, and then this one was another one. That's just... Those two have just always stuck with me, so...
Oh, should we tell them about a possible bonus episode coming up?
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. So, oh wait, which one are you talking about? Halloween?
All of them. No.
Oh, all of them.
Well, we do have a Halloween episode coming up, hopefully released on Halloween.
Yes.
And then we're going to be taking questions from you guys, if you guys have any questions to ask us. And that'll be included in a later podcast.
Yeah, that'll be a bonus episode for Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. So it'll be Q&A, and then we will also release more bloopers. Anywho, let's not keep people waiting. Let's get to the case.
On December 5th, 1945 at 2:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 torpedo bombers known as Flight 19, or the Lost Patrol, went on a routine training mission otherwise known as Navigation Problem Number 1. The exercise was scheduled to be 3 hours and had the pilots flying in a triangular flight plan that would take them east from the Florida coast and conduct low-level bombing runs at a place called Hens and Chicken Shoals. From there, they would head north and fly over the Grand Bahama Islands, before changing course and for a third and final time, heading southwest back to Fort Lauderdale. It was supposed to be a routine training mission. Everything was supposed to go off without a hitch. It was also supposed to be the trainees' last mission before they earned their wings. 18 other flights had already completed this exact training mission, which is why they were called Flight 19. They were the 19th flight to go out that day. The weather was standard flying conditions. It was starting to drizzle a little, but that's nothing new for Florida. It was a nice 67 degrees outside, easy flying conditions. What could go wrong, right? Unfortunately, none of the things that were supposed to happen did. Even before the pilots took off, things were not going to plan. The mission was led by Lieutenant Charles Taylor. He was considered an experienced pilot, clocking in many flying hours, but wasn't very knowledgeable around the Fort Lauderdale topography, due to the fact that he was previously stationed in Miami.
So that got me thinking about why he was so confused later on, because Fort Lauderdale and Miami are not that far apart from each other. Driving distance is 28 miles away, so I just feel like it wouldn't have been that different. At least that's what it seems to me.
Yeah, I didn't understand why he would be confused.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, he would just land at a different part of Florida rather than Fort Lauderdale. I mean, you could just redirect yourself. It's fine. You're in a plane.
Yeah, and it's not like
it's
not like they're
fine.
even on different coasts of Florida. They're literally Fort Lauderdale is literally 28 miles north of Miami, so it's just on the same coast. I don't know. I just didn't understand it, but I'm sure there's...
Yeah, even when I was looking at, like, flight times, what is it, like 15, 30 minutes? Yeah. If that, I don't know.
Yeah.
You see, the first incident that happened that gave an indication that this day would not go as planned was that Taylor showed up 25 minutes late, which, according to sources, it's not normal to be late for a training mission, especially when you're the one leading the mission. The trainees were waiting. They just wanted to get this done so they can get their wings. But Taylor wasn't just late. According to witnesses, Taylor was acting strange. He seemed agitated about something, and seemed like he wasn't feeling too well. He even asked his commanding officer if someone else could replace him on the flight. "I don't want to take the hop," he told his commanding officer. Unfortunately, Taylor was denied this request. Now, in your research, did you find out why he was denied?
Well, I found a couple of reasons why he was denied, so it's not completely clear. So one of the reasons he was denied was because one of the reasons they say he was denied is because there was no other pilot there to take his place. And then another reason I came across was because he never gave a specific reason to his commanding officers as to why he wanted to be taken off the training mission. He just kept stating that he had a bad feeling. And this apparently wasn't reason enough for his commanding officers to replace him last minute.
But whatever the reason was for Taylor to request being replaced, he was forced to regardless. They took off from the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in 5 TBM Torpedo Avenger bomber planes. Quote, "Save for one plane that only carried 2 men, each of the Avengers was crewed by 3 Navy men or Marines, most of whom had logged around 300 hours in the air." End quote. The planes they were in were said to be, quote, "very robust, safe, and the U.S. Navy's best bombing planes to destroy enemy submarines. It could carry up to 2,000 pounds of bombing ammunition and had a range of 1,000 miles." End quote. The first part of the training mission went well. They reached Hens and Chicken Shoals and dropped their practice bombs without incident. Where it started to go wrong was on the return. For reasons still unknown, after they turned north, Taylor became certain that his compass was malfunctioning, and that they were flying in the wrong direction. Here's a timeline of the flight. 1410. Military planes took off on a routine training mission that would take them far over the Gulf of Florida. 1430. Dropped their practice bombs without incident. Shortly after is when Taylor had mentioned that the compass was malfunctioning. 1500. A recording shows that one of the student pilots in the flight requested and was permitted to drop his plane's last practice bomb, to lighten the load and save on fuel. 1530. Taylor sent the message to Control Tower that his compass was malfunctioning, and thought he was somewhere around the Florida Keys, further south of the location where they took off. Instead of heading east, he thought they flew south due to compass issues.
Which makes no sense, as that's hundreds of miles off course. He knew that they had made it to Hens and Chicken Shoals, so how could they be so far off course?
1600. A conversation was heard between Taylor and the pilot of one of the other planes in regards to their compass, in which the pilot replied, "I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost around the last turn." In the same recording, Taylor was heard saying, "Both of my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale. I'm over land, but it's broken. I am sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." Not long after that transmission, the radio signal was lost.
To further talk about the radio transmission, here's more of the conversation. Taylor told another pilot who picked up his radio transmissions, who is known as ft-74, that he thought they were in the Keys. Here is his response. ft-74 said, quote, "Put the sun on your port wing if you are in the Keys and fly up the coast until you get to Miami. Fort Lauderdale is 20 miles further, your first port after Miami. The air station is directly on your left from the port." End quote. These instructions would have made sense if the flight had been over the Keys, but if over the Bahamas, it was the equivalent of vectoring the flight out over the open seas. ft-74 was coming to the problem fresh and initially had no idea which mission or location the lost flight was located. Thus, he offered instructions based on what he was told, that they were over the Florida Keys. Unfortunately, Taylor and his men were not over the Florida Keys. They were over the Bahamas, and so this actually put them going towards the open ocean instead of towards land.
Operators had suggested to Taylor to switch to another frequency, the search and rescue frequency, so that they could triangulate his location. This suggestion went ignored by Taylor and the other pilots. One of the pilots said, "Damn it, if we could just fly west, we'd get home. Head west, damn it." Taylor then ordered the flight east. 1750. Flight 19 shows up on the radar. They were apparently near New Smyrna Beach, Florida. But by then communication was poor, and they were losing daylight. The weather started to pick up, and Flight 19 was running low on fuel. According to an article on History.com, Taylor was eventually persuaded to turn around and head west, but shortly after 6 p.m. he seemed to have canceled the order and once again changed direction. "We didn't go far enough east," he said, still worried that he might be in the Gulf. Quote, "We may just as well turn around and go east again." End quote. His pilots probably argued against the decision. Some investigators even believe that one plane broke off and flew in another direction, but most followed their commander's lead.
So this is a very important point. I also read that if the operators had been able to communicate with Flight 19, they could have told them to keep flying west for 30 minutes and they would have reached safety. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make contact with Taylor to tell him this, and that's when he turned the pilots back around, unknowingly flying them further back out to sea.
1820. Final transmissions. "Everything looks strange, even the ocean," said one voice. Another pilot could be heard saying, "It looks like we're entering white water. We're completely lost." Then, "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we'll all go down together." It was calculated that fuel would have run out by 2000 hours, so a search and rescue team was sent out just before those last transmissions at 1800, in hopes that they would find something. But again, things wouldn't go as planned. 2 mariners were sent out and only 1 returned. Quote, "Surface vessels, both military and merchant, were notified of the disappearances, and 2 consolidated PMB Mariner flying boats were diverted from their original flights to participate in square pattern searches in an attempt to locate any trace of Flight 19. One of these planes, PBM-5, Bureau number 59225, took off from NAS Banana River in Brevard County, Florida, at 1927 hours, carrying a crew of 13 rescue personnel. The plane called a routine message a few minutes later, but disappeared off the radar entirely around 20 minutes of takeoff. That night, a merchant ship off the coast of Fort Lauderdale reported seeing a burst of flame shortly before passing through an oil slick in the same vicinity the missing PBM had dropped off the radar." End quote. The Navy was flabbergasted. They couldn't understand how not only Flight 19 went missing into thin air, but then the rescue mariner as well. This prompted a huge investigation. According to an article, the search for Flight 19 involved hundreds of ships and planes and was declared at the time as one of the largest air and sea rescue efforts ever made in history. The ships covered almost 200,000 miles of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. Combined units joined in the search as the officials were investigating the missing planes. In addition, many Navy officers and Coast Guards joined the hunt. Frank Daly, a Naval Reserve captain, recalls that, quote, 3 days, 6 hours a day, they plowed up the whole coast of Florida, looking for the wreckage but never saw a thing, end quote. To this day, no evidence has ever been found of Flight 19, or the missing mariner. The official Navy report declared that it was, quote, as if they had flown to Mars, end quote. Coming up, we discuss the theories of what possibly happened to Flight 19. Stay with us.
Now back to the case. There are quite a few theories regarding Flight 19. Some are more out there than others, but that's how it usually is. I'm not going to talk in depth about all of them, but I will mention most of them. The first one that I'm going to mention is the theory of a possible encounter with aliens. Whether you believe in them or not, Mary, this is one of the most popular theories out there. It even inspired the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg. There's not much more to say about this theory, so let's move on. The next theory I want to talk about, and this is also one of the most popular, is the theory of the Bermuda Triangle. I'm sure most of you have heard about the Bermuda Triangle at some point, but if you haven't, here's a lesson on what it exactly is. The Bermuda Triangle is a section of the Atlantic Ocean with the points of the triangle at Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. The triangle covers 500,000 square miles of ocean. This area has been the location of hundreds of accounts of ships and planes disappearing or crashing in the triangle. The crazy thing is, this has been going on for hundreds of years. The first known account of the Bermuda Triangle was actually by Christopher Columbus himself. He reported seeing a, quote, great flame of fire crash into the sea, end quote, and then talked about seeing a strange light out in the distance. He also wrote about erratic compass readings, which is interesting since Taylor stated his compass was malfunctioning as well. One of the most infamous tragedies to occur in the Triangle was the disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918. The Cyclops was a 542-foot Navy cargo ship with a crew of 300 men on board. It also contained 10,000 tons of manganese ore. Even though the Cyclops was equipped to send out an SOS distress signal if needed, it never did. It just vanished. There was an extensive search, but nothing was found. Because of World War I, the Cyclops never got the attention it should have. Then in 1941, 2 similar ships vanished without a trace on the same route. According to an article by Vincent Gaddis, quote, during the past 2 decades alone, this sea mystery at our back door has claimed almost 1,000 lives. But even this is only as inference. In this series of disasters, not one body has ever been recovered, end quote. And then you have, of course, Flight 19. This tragedy is the one that actually got people noticing the strange things happening in this little triangle section of the world. People started piecing things together and noticing all the bizarre disappearances and accidents that had occurred over the years. So what is it about this particular area of the world that has planes and ships vanishing without a trace? This brings us into one of our next theories, which kind of goes hand in hand with the Bermuda Triangle: parallel dimensions. There's not much on this, except that some people think there are parallel dimensions in the Bermuda Triangle, and that accounts for the mysterious disappearances. And then we have the most probable theory, which is simply human error. It's noted on BermudaAttractions.com that while Taylor was an experienced pilot, he did have a history of getting lost. He was lost at 3 different times during World War II. And on 2 occasions, he had to ditch his plane into the sea so he could be rescued. Secondly, he didn't have good knowledge about the area around East and South Florida. Is this why he got confused after they turned north to head to the Bahamas along with his compass malfunctioning? Besides what happened to Flight 19, there's also one of the biggest unanswered questions to date, which is what happened to Taylor? Why didn't he want to go on the flight that day? Why was he late? And why did he keep saying he had a bad feeling? Did he have some sort of premonition before the flight and just felt something bad was going to happen? Some research I read asked why Taylor ignored his gut instinct before the flight, but I stand by that he didn't. He asked to be removed. He told his officers he had a bad feeling. I'm not sure what would have happened to him had he flat out refused to go, but obviously not following a command from your superior is never a good thing. Some people claim that maybe Taylor was hung over from the previous night, but there is no proof of this. If it was human error, there is a theory of an error chain that made it so. First off, according to an article from historicwings.com, none of the aircrafts had a clock installed. This is a simple navigational requirement. It is assumed the pilots had watches on, though no one is sure if it was ever confirmed. Second, as I said earlier, Taylor was late, therefore the flight took off later than intended. And then the compasses were malfunctioning. What made the compass malfunction? Let's talk about that for a second. I live on the east coast of Florida, and the ocean is out east, and the land is to your west. So, they needed to fly west to get to land. So why didn't they just follow the sun?
That's what I've been saying this entire time.
It's so weird that they didn't just follow the sunset.
Yeah, point it at the horizon, check where the sun is, figure out what to do from then.
Right.
Or at least that's what I've read. I mean, I don't really know, obviously. But that's what makes sense.
No, but that's what even the research says.
Mm-hmm.
They basically said, like, why didn't they, once the compasses were malfunctioning, they should have just followed the sunset because they knew that it was west.
Yeah.
So, as to why they didn't, as to why Taylor didn't, those are still obviously unanswered questions. According to Gaddis, quote, let's suppose that the patrol had run into a magnetic storm that caused deviations in their compasses. The sun was still above the western horizon. The flyers could have ignored their compasses and flown west by observation of the sun. Apparently, not only the sea looked strange, but the sun was invisible, end quote. So really, the compasses malfunctioning shouldn't have caused that much of an issue because the sun was still out at this point. Also, everything was checked beforehand. Quote, the bombers had been carefully checked and fueled to capacity. The engines, controls, instruments, and compasses were in perfect condition, according to later testimony. Each plane carried a self-inflating life raft, and each man was equipped with a life jacket. All 14 pilots had flight experience ranging from 13 months to 6 years, end quote. Another weird occurrence is that the crew had rescue radios, but they never used them. Here are some other theories that we came across. Violent weather known as air bombs, methane hydrates, and the Gulf Stream. In regards to the first two, I'm not sure exactly what they were talking about with those theories, but I do know what they were talking about with the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is actually kind of a special area of the ocean, and I'm going to quote, or not quote, but I'm going to reference a TV show that maybe some of you have seen, called Dexter. Have you seen that, Mary?
I had made it an attempt to watch it and I got bored.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, if any of you have seen Dexter, you'll know that in the later episodes, he actually dumps the bodies in the Gulf Stream because the people who did the show actually did their research. It actually does help waste or whatever is dumped there. It actually helps bring it out to sea. So that was his way of getting rid of the bodies, and the theory behind the Gulf Stream is that if they did crash and, go into the ocean and die, or any of the people that disappear into the Bermuda Triangle, if they're by the Gulf Stream, the reason why bodies or parts of airplanes or ships aren't showing up when searches are made is because they've been carried off by the Gulf Stream. Whatever or whoever may have caused the human error, the ending is the same. The crew ended up flying the wrong way, out into the ocean instead of towards land, and vanished. Some people think they ran out of fuel and most likely crashed into the depths of the ocean, never to be seen again. And if so, what about the mariner that went out to search for them? Were they lost to the same fate? So, listeners, do you think it was human error, a parallel universe, aliens, or were the pilots just another victim to the mysterious Bermuda Triangle? I guess we'll never know for sure.
All right, Mystery Knox listeners, that's it for our case today. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we'd love to hear your ideas and or theories on this case, so let us know on our Instagram and Facebook at Mystery Knox Podcast, on Twitter at Mystery Knox Pod, or send us a voice message on anchor.fm/Mystery Knox Podcast. A list of our sources and the pictures from this case can be found on our blog at mysteryknoxpodcast.wordpress.com. Your support is always appreciated, so if you enjoyed what you've heard, please let us know by giving us a review on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll see you on our next episode, and remember, stay weird, stay curious.
Mischief managed.